According to the accepted timeline, Malta's great megalithic temples were built beginning around the 4th millennium BC. But the stones themselves may be telling a very different story. Because if their builders were following the movement of one particular star, Malta's temple tradition may reach back thousands of years further. Malta contains an extraordinary concentration of prehistoric megalithic architecture. The conventional chronology places the great temple building tradition mainly between approximately 3600 and 2500 BCE. Even on that timeline, these are among the oldest surviving freestanding monumental stone structures on Earth. However, it presents a strange picture. A relatively small island population supposedly developed sophisticated monumental architecture, transported enormous stones, and constructed complex sacred spaces. They weren't simply piling stones together, they were building with geometry, orientation, and an extraordinary awareness of their environment. At Mnajdra, sunlight enters the temple in ways that are far from random. The South Temple interacts with sunlight around the equinoxes and solstices. But the sun may only be part of the story. Night falls, and as we reveal Sirius, researchers examining the orientations of Maltese temples found that their axes were not randomly distributed, they formed distinct patterns. This leads us to Lenny Redake's interpretation, which introduces an alternative astronomical chronology. Earth slowly wobbles on its axis, and over thousands of years, this changes where stars appear to rise and set on the horizon. Sirius, therefore, did not occupy the same position in Malta's ancient sky that it does today. As we trace the changing position of Sirius backward through time, something remarkable happens. The orientations of the temples can be interpreted as tracking Sirius across thousands of years. If this interpretation is correct, Malta's sacred landscape didn't begin around 3600 BC. It began near the end of the Ice Age. This opens the door to a much older timeline of the temple tradition extending back to around 9150 BCE. Rather than belonging solely to a compressed Neolithic period, the differing orientations of these temples may represent successive structures that catered to the changing positions of Sirius. As precession slowly moved Sirius out of alignment with an older temple, another structure could be created, leading to a long legacy of cultural inheritance. Seen this way, the differences between the temples stop looking random, they become a chronology written into the sky. This is a tradition passed from generation to generation for millennia, not one sudden architectural explosion. The end of the Ice Age transformed coastlines across the planet. At around 9150 BCE, Malta existed in a very different Mediterranean. Humans moved through a landscape that was rich and diverse. They were not primitive, they practiced sophisticated fishing, navigation, and stone tool making. However, as the oceans gradually rose, communities had to retreat inland, and land gradually vanished. This loss of coastline may mean that what survives above the water is only a fragment of what once existed here. And this raises the most important question: how do you date a stone? Archaeological chronologies rely heavily on datable material associated with structures and occupation phases. But finding evidence of people in the 4th millennium BC does not automatically tell us when every stone tradition first began. A sacred place can be inherited, modified, rebuilt, and used again. If Malta's temples had a much older origin, later occupation could dominate the material archaeologists are able to date. The question isn't whether Neolithic people used these temples, they clearly did. The question is whether they were truly the first. Historic contexts like Göbekli Tepe, dated to around 9600 BCE, show that monumental construction at such a time was indeed possible. If monumental architecture could be achieved at Göbekli Tepe, then a date near 9000 BC for Malta cannot simply be dismissed. The early phases of human civilization were capable of far more than we have previously imagined. In light of this, Malta's astronomical mystery becomes considerably harder to ignore. As we witness the beautiful sunset at Mnajdra, transitioning into night, the star Sirius appears above. Perhaps Malta's temples aren't monuments from one brief Neolithic flowering. Perhaps they are the surviving chapters of something much longer. A tradition that watched the same star, generation after generation, for thousands of years. The accepted dates were written from what we found beneath the stones, but perhaps the builders left their date somewhere else, in the sky.